Welcome to 10th or Tuesday. This is episode number 32. My name is Michael Boldin, joined by
Michael Maharrey.
Mike. Today is day 446 in our tabulation of how many days that the GOP, the Republicans, have failed to give us something to get rid of Obamacare. I guess that's a little different than I normally say it, right? The GOP has failed to get rid of Obamacare. We heard repeatedly throughout the election campaign, the 2016 campaign, that day number one, Obamacare is gone. We heard from activists over and over and over. You guys don't need to support these bills in the states to nullify Obamacare. All you have to do is elect Trump and the Republicans. Obamacare was going to be gone. The EPA was going to be gone. We didn't have to deal with the Clean Power Plan. We didn't have to deal with Common Core or gun control. None of it. It was all going to be gone. Well, all of that is still around day 446. Mike, let's do an episode on all the things, and I'm keeping a list somewhere of all the things that we were told were going to be just eliminated because we were going to have Republican control in Congress and the White House. It's all stuck here. And now on top of it, we may have an unconstitutional escalation of war in Syria. I don't know if they've given an announcement. I know yesterday they were saying in the next 24 to 48 hours, they were going to decide. But I think the key is it's not under the Constitution. It's not up to the president to make a decision on whether or not there will be war between the United States and Syria. I guess there already is, but any further than there is, right?
Yep, and I'm pretty sure that somebody's getting bombed.
Yeah, they probably have been all along, but it's not
Well,
good.
they have been. It's true.
We know for so many years, like Bill Clinton starts a bombing after the Lewinsky thing starts. George W. Bush and his neocon buddies had been planning with the Project for a New American Century. You can read their old paper. You can find this called Rebuilding America's Defenses. These are papers from the likes of Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz. All those guys, yeah, they wanted to have a war in Iraq before Bush even got into office, so it was very convenient that at the height of his unpopularity, there was a war that started in Iraq. Obama, well, nothing ever stopped for the peace president, and now we see this continuation of more, possibly from Donald Trump. Not good. But moving forward, I want to talk about kind of a big chunk of today's episode, Mike, about civil asset forfeiture. I mean, we're not necessarily dedicating the whole show to it, but there's been a lot of legislation that has moved forward or passed in various stages on asset forfeiture. So first of all, just to kick that off, give us an overview of what civil asset forfeiture is. And then we also need to talk about maybe after that how it relates to a federal program as well.
Right. So civil asset forfeiture in its simplest terms is that cops take people's stuff without due process. They seize assets, money, cars, firearms, oftentimes never even charging an individual with any type of crime. And then the property itself is charged with the crime in court, and the individual is required to go in and prove that material wasn't used in a criminal case. And if they can't prove that, and that flips due process on its head, if they can't prove that, then the police get to keep their stuff. And generally, this money and the proceeds from these things end up going into police department budgets, which creates an incentive for police to actually do this because it's a budget hole they can fill.
Yeah, in essence, it's really it's just government stealing. It's legalized government theft. It's totally opposite the way the system's supposed to be set up. Like, okay, if you're convicted, you lose your freedom in some way. But now keep in mind, most of the laws on the books are immoral, unjust, or unconstitutional anyway. So I could make a claim, I'm sure you could, that even for people who are convicted of most laws, that it is illegal to be taking their stuff because they shouldn't be getting convicted for that stuff in the first place. So to take it even worse, people are getting convicted for things that they shouldn't be getting convicted for, or they're getting arrested.
Right. Not even in some states, you don't even have to make an arrest.
Yeah,
they're just say, we think this money was involved in drugs, so we're going to take your money and you go on your way.
And you have to prove that it wasn't. Totally opposite. Okay, so asset forfeiture, really nasty stuff. Legalized government stealing. Some states in recent years have taken action to restrict that practice, reduce it, cut it off. And so what happens, there's another program, Mike, that we've talked about a little bit here called the Federal Equitable Sharing Program. This is something that I think helps fuel the nationalization of local police. It's a way for you, all right?
I'm just choking.
Hey, asset forfeiture's bad stuff, man.
Like, got me all choked up.
It does. So the federal program, what they do is they call the Equitable Sharing Program. It is a nationalized equitable sharing program that kind of brings all local police into a federal policing agenda. So local police who act as national or federal police officers and do the legwork for federal cases then get a bunch of the proceeds.
Yeah, up to 80%. And so what they do is they take these cases and they essentially just pass them off. It's a process known as adoption, and they pass them to the federal government. The federal government prosecutes the forfeiture under federal law instead of state law, which oftentimes is much more lenient and much easier to prosecute. And then the law enforcement agency gets up to 80% of those proceeds back to their own budgets. So it's a way of circumventing stronger state laws. And it's interesting, if you go and look at the Institute of Justice has done a really good job of compiling a lot of information and data on this process.
ij.org, right?
Yes, exactly. And what you'll find is that the states with the most strict state asset forfeiture laws tend to be the ones that have the most equitable sharing money coming in. So, for instance, California was one of the worst offenders of the equitable sharing, or biggest participants, I guess is the right way to put it.
Right.
And, until they closed that loophole, they were getting all kinds of money because they had some of the most strict state asset forfeiture laws in the country. So the police would just circumvent those, pass the cases off to the feds, let the feds do the prosecutory work, and then they cash in on the proceeds.
Yeah, so another state that actually did this in, I think it was the way our calculations came up, somewhere around 80 to 85% of the cases where the state wouldn't pass off these cases to the federal government was Colorado. They passed a law, I believe, last year to restrict that practice. And now another bill just yesterday, House Bill 1020, took that foundation and expanded on it a little bit by passing the House. I think the vote was 38 to 25. It wasn't.
Just close.
I mean, it's pretty close, but tell us a little bit about that bill, Mike.
The bill does a couple of things. One of the main features, and I think this is a really good step, is that the bill that was passed last year that closed that federal equitable sharing loophole, it also created a very extensive reporting system and very robust reporting requirements for all seizing agencies. And this new bill that just passed the House actually expands the agencies that are required to make these reports. So I think some agencies were falling through the cracks based on the definitions that were in the first law. So they're expanding it to make sure that any agency that's involved in forfeiture at all has to do reporting. And I think reporting is really important. It's an important first step in the reform process because people just don't know. And when you start shining the light on these numbers, on what's actually being taken in, on the circumstances that surround these, you get these horrible cases of, some poor guy that has his rent money in his car and gets pulled over and they decide it's drug money. You see all these things and you have a much more fertile ground for reform.
Well, it's interesting to me. So far, most of our experience outside of Colorado, for example, has relied primarily on anecdotal evidence. Right. This person had their last $1,000. They just withdrew it from the bank. They were going to get a money order to pay rent or something like that. They got pulled over. They got profiled for their race or something like that, and the money was taken as a drug crime. And that's been the majority of what we've used to fight against these types of things. And I think a lot of organizations have done that. They've highlighted IJ, Reason Magazine, for example. They've highlighted stories of people who've been personally affected by these asset forfeiture laws. But reporting gives us some concrete statistics to say, okay, well, this amount of the budget is being used or being paid for by collecting money from people who were never convicted of a crime. Well, that tells an entirely different story about how police budgets are being funded.
Right. And you know what they say? They say that, sunlight's the best antiseptic. So any type of robust reporting that we can get, it's almost always a good first step. And, this Colorado bill is a good example of how even, what you might consider a mediocre proposal that's passed can set the stage to pass a better proposal down the road. We've seen this a lot with the marijuana laws. You'll get a kind of real tight medical marijuana program, and then as it gets implemented, you'll see it expand over time. So it's really important to set those foundations. And I know for me, sometimes it's frustrating. I look at some of these bills and I'm like, oh, they could go so much further. And
they can always go so much further. Yes. That's the thing.
So there's a temptation to, I'm not going to oppose this because it doesn't do so-and-so. But I think it's real important for people out there to understand that in the legislative process, even taking small steps, as long as there's steps forward, it's a good thing. As long as there's people out there, activists out there that are willing to continue pushing the agenda and move things forward.
And the way we can reference it, the whole Tenther method, is the letter from Thomas Jefferson to James Madison after the Kentucky resolutions of 1798 passed. He sent him a copy. Mike, this is great. This was your find, and we put it in a video. How did he basically say it? Like, we always have to hold to our ultimate principles, but let's push as far as, quote, events will render prudent, right?
That's it.
So the Jeffersonian strategy is to hold to your principles, talk about what you have the right to do, what you should be doing, but recognize the facts on the ground and take every tiny step possible to get to that and continue holding those principles. So the difference, let's say, for example, in Colorado HB 1020, between what the bad guys versus the good guys might do, the bad guys will say, oh, HB 1020 is fixing everything.
Right.
You're good to go. But the good guys will say, it doesn't fix everything. This is what could fix everything or turn things around. And we'll take this for now, but be warned, we're coming back for more. We'll be demanding more over time. The other thing that I like to think of when it comes to, should we oppose this because it doesn't do enough? If you have the perspective that state governments, like the federal government, but not as bad, are your enemy.
Right.
If your enemy actually is put into a corner where they have to do something that's positive for your liberty, then that's good. I think a lot of people have misplaced faith in government. They think that government, even though, in theory it's supposed to protect liberty, but it doesn't. No. Its existence is an affront to liberty in just about every situation in the country, and probably, I don't know the rest of the world. But so when they do something positive, it's not like we should be surprised that they haven't done something more positive. So we take each step, we continue to work to corner them and push them further and further. Colorado HB 1020 is a positive step forward, building on last year's step on restricting transfers of federal asset forfeiture cases to the federal government to help rip people off. So that's positive. Something similar passed, is it similar? In Kansas, House Bill 2459. This is an asset forfeiture bill that just simply requires reporting on what's going on. Does it cover, in the reporting, Mike, do you know if it covers how many times that they're transferring cases to the feds? Or
it does include that information.
So that doesn't exist before, right? No one knows how often they're doing it, how much money they're getting. This is basically a system where the federal government is basically partnering with local police. The police are doing federal police work for the federal government, which basically lets the feds off the hook. They don't have to pay the bills. They don't have to have the budgets to actually do the work that they want to do, and therefore they can, spend money on a bunch of other stuff that they shouldn't be doing by leaning on the locals. This is why we don't want locals doing federal jobs for the federal government.
Exactly.
Because it forces the federal government to take responsibility for their actions and their failures. So the Kansas situation is there's a real bad asset. They're graded pretty low, right?
I believe so. Actually, I didn't look.
From what I remember, I think they're pretty bad.
I think I think they're a D-, but
by the Institute for Justice Rating. So no one knows how often or what they're collecting, how much money they're getting out of these asset forfeiture cases, how often they're transferring to the federal government, how much money they're getting from the feds at all. And this bill, did it get signed into law?
I don't remember.
HB 2459. It's all right. I can pull it up. Signed into law.
Signed into law. And I think that one might have gone into immediate effect.
Okay.
I, I don't know. There's been several bills that have passed
I
recently.
know.
Good thing, so I get confused about which is which. So I'll call
So
that a positive problem.
So here's from the report. It says when the Institute for Justice tried to get data from the Kansas State Police, it took 5 months and $500 to get the information. So basically, they're hiding the amount of asset forfeiture cases that they're doing. They're hiding the amount of money that they're collecting. And then in the times that they're working with the federal government, they're hiding that as well. And this bill then shines a light on it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, if the government has a way to hide something, they're going to do it. And I can attest to that personally by the fact that my own city's suing me because I'm trying to find out about cameras in my my local police department's using. So if there is a way for them to hide it, they're going to hide it. So it's always a good thing if they make it so they can't hide it.
Right. So House Bill 2459 starts the process in Kansas. It requires some reporting, and then I think it's incumbent upon us and other organizations. I know IJ will probably be following up on this and doing some reports to say, hey, this is how much money they're taking. These are how many people that have never been convicted and lost their property. And this is how often that they're working with the Federal Department of Justice and stealing people's property. From there, we're definitely going to need to build on it and then shut those programs down over time.
Here's a great opportunity if anybody's watching out in Kansas. This is a great opportunity to start a little grassroots group.
Yeah.
And do some local activism and take advantage of this and start collecting that data and, do some blogging, do some reporting. It's people that are there on the ground. If you're looking for something to do, say, I need to do something for liberty. Here's a great opportunity that would not be terribly difficult. They're going to be collecting the data for you. So, if you take the time and effort to build a little website and Facebook page and start putting that information out there, that will spread like wildfire in the world of social media.
Yeah, once people learn about it, then you can build the pressure to actually put it to an end. Require a conviction before people's property is taken. The next bill on asset forfeiture is in Wisconsin, just went into effect, was signed. I think it goes into effect, Mike, you told me the day after that it was signed. Yeah. So last week, Senate Bill 61 restricts state-level asset forfeiture and takes a small step also against the federal program. So it does some of both, right?
Yeah, I think it does require a conviction, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
And so that's a very positive, strong step on that level. And then the federal loophole, what it does is it prohibits the state or local law enforcement agency from collecting the equitable sharing money if there is no conviction in the federal forfeiture. So it doesn't stop them from passing the cases off. But if the case doesn't result in a conviction, they can't collect the money. So I call that kind of a first step in addressing the loophole. I'd really rather see them ultimately say, you know what, we're not going to let our state and local police pass these cases off at all. But
yeah, I don't want local police acting as ATF agents.
No.
I know a lot of conservatives want local police to be federal immigration agents while Trump is in office. But when whoever defeats well, I don't know if Trump's going to lose halfway through.
But he won't be there forever. I mean,
no, of course not. And Republicans or a person who wants to restrict immigration isn't going to be there forever. I think there's probably going to be a backlash at some point, and sooner or later you're going to have some extreme leftist in there, a Bernie Sanders type, and they're going to want local police to be gun grabbers. Mm-hmm. They tried this years ago, the Brady bill, and thankfully Sheriff Mack and Sheriff Prince took it to the Supreme Court and pushed through and followed up with the anti-commandeering doctrine saying you can't require that, but that doesn't mean they're not going to keep pushing. Yeah. So the more that you have local police acting as federal agents, the more dangerous it's going to be in the future. So saying that in this situation in Wisconsin, they're not acting as federal agents unless, I mean, it cuts back on it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It lowers the incentive a little bit, and it at least acknowledges that this is an issue. So,
yeah.
And again, I think there's some reporting requirements in this bill that will also help us to see, how often is this getting passed over, and how often are there convictions? So we can see all of these things. We can continue to push that envelope further.
That's excellent. It's a very positive step forward in Wisconsin. SB 61 now in effect in that state. And then another bill that, you know, we keep talking about wanting to be positive. It's hard to sometimes in states like Tennessee and I would say Arizona as well, that you'd see really, really good legislation introduced, move forward, a lot of grassroots support for while Obama was in office. But now that Republicans are in charge and Trump is in office in Washington, D.C., all of a sudden the state is playing bootlicker. They just don't want to do anything that upsets the state partnership with the federal government. But then again, maybe. House Bill 2021, Tennessee. I'm just being hard on Republicans. I shouldn't be. I'm hard on everybody. They all suck. Yeah, but so House Bill 2021 passed in Tennessee. It's on the governor's desk waiting a signature. What I don't like is this was a very small restriction on civil asset forfeiture in the state, right?
Yes, it was.
So are they requiring a conviction?
No, nothing even close. Basically what it does is it does require the owner to be notified before there's an asset forfeiture hearing. So apparently they weren't even notifying people. Like they take their stuff and you know, there'd be a hearing and all of a sudden they didn't even realize that there was a hearing because there wasn't any type of notification. So that's how bad the asset forfeiture laws in Tennessee were.
Wow.
So they did away with that, and they also created some provisions that will allow people who are people who have their asset seized and then prove, hey, my stuff wasn't involved in a crime, they will be able to collect their attorney's fees in that case. So that's.
But you got to prove it innocent after the fact.
Exactly. But at least now, if you feel like you have a good case, you can at least get a lawyer and know that it's not going to cost you $100,000 to get your $3,000 car back. So, you know, I think these are improvements in the state law for sure.
Yes. So interestingly enough, so the negative on that, and I'll tell you, I'm going to tell people watching why I'm so down on this Tennessee one in a second, because it is an improvement, very small. It also shines a light on the fact of how bad things are in Tennessee when it comes to asset forfeiture. Right. It is horrible that people aren't even being notified of these hearings. This is insane. They called this the Edwin Meese Asset Forfeiture Act. Well, supposedly Ed Meese was against asset forfeiture. Maybe this is a way of getting people to think that this is a good bill. But in the process of going through this forfeiture reform debate in Tennessee, for a year, House Bill 421 has been introduced. It was set up for hearings. This is a separate bill that would have done way more. It would have also addressed the federal equitable sharing program, opting out of it in a vast majority of situations.
Required a criminal conviction.
And require a criminal conviction on a state level. And, of course, the Republicans in the state there decided not to do it. This is a heavily Republican-dominated situation, so we can blame Republicans for this specifically.
Oh, yeah,
they killed the really good bill and went with the smallest step possible. I mean, even if they... There was a
good name.
Yeah, they got a good name. They got a good name. They had an excellent bill. It would have been one of the best in the country, and I wouldn't expect that in every state. But again, you go for it, and then you recognize where you can step back, and maybe they could have done somewhere in between. But they did the absolute least that they could do, and still say that they took a step forward by killing the best one that. Man, it passed here in California when Obama was in office.
Right.
So it's embarrassing for Tennessee to not move forward with something positive. But, man, I'm like speaking out of both sides of my mouth. I say it is still positive. HB 1021.
And here's the thing. You know, I guess here's how you can look at it. It's one thing to see a state like Kansas where nothing's been done and somebody says, you know what, we're going to at least put our foot in the door and take a step forward. That's one thing. And it's easier to be positive about that than to look at a state like Tennessee where somebody had the guts to say, you know what, we're going to go for it here, and then to get absolute crap. You know, yeah. So it's like, it's the, you know, in Kansas, we got a foot in the door. In Tennessee, we got a door in the face.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Okay. That's I can go with that. And then I'm still talking out of both sides of my mouth, though. I just got to be honest. I mean, I love positive small steps forward. I generally support them. but in a place like Tennessee where this should easily have passed. And I think Tennessee has kind of a history of this. So we've talked about how they passed a non-binding resolution. I think it was almost unanimously a couple of years ago while Obama was in office to basically say that the legislature supports the establishment of a bullion, a sound money depository in the state, like the one that's being opened in Texas. Oh yeah, we should do this. And then for 2 years now, no one has even filed a bill to follow up on this, to say, okay, well, let's make it happen, because it's going to require legislation in the state to actually make that happen. So they unanimously, or maybe there was 1 or 2 dissenting votes on both houses.
And it was actually signed by the governor. So
okay, so everybody's on board, supposedly. Everybody's on board when Obama's in office on, undermining the Federal Reserve or supporting sound money, and now nothing. There have been some small bills. There is a bill under consideration that we think is very good to remove taxes from the exchange of gold and silver, sales taxes. But there's actually been a few bills of that type filed, and they all either get voted down or pushed to the end of the legislative session. In other words, they're just getting shoved under the rug. So I think a lot of the legislature in Tennessee is a bunch of just scam artists. They're going to try to put names on things or pass things that don't actually have effect, resolutions that don't have effect, so they can grandstand. But when it comes to actually taking concrete steps, they're really awful. There are a lot of states that are like this. I would say most of them, man, so that's part of why I'm hard on Tennessee, because they have
we've had a lot of experience with Tennessee. I mean, they did the same thing with guns. Of all the places in the country that you would think a Second Amendment Preservation Act or a Second Amendment Act would be a no-brainer, and it gets killed, and not just killed, but ruthlessly crushed, and we get vilified in the process. So there's that kind of stuff too with some of the folks there. So
Mike, you did some reporting. We covered a bill in Minnesota, a very good asset forfeiture reform bill that deals with both the state program requiring a conviction and then opting out of most of the federal equitable sharing program. I think it's House File 3729 something. I don't know the bill number offhand, but you did a report that we just published on the homepage of the site about the opposition from law enforcement lobby organizations. And I think you and I know that this is indicative of how the process goes in every state. So the top opposition to restricting asset forfeiture, that is, restricting the government's power to take stuff without a criminal conviction, is police. Give us a little overview of that report that you did.
Yeah, so thanks to Dave Benner for tracking down the audio for that committee hearing. So, it was really interesting listening to the testimony. There was a police officer. He's a police chief. I can't remember what city he was from, but he was the head or one of the people on the State Police Chiefs Association. And then they had a sheriff deputy who was on the state sheriff, the organization that lobbies for sheriffs. And both of these guys testified. And it's so funny listening to these people, because the first thing that's out of their mouth, well, it's not about the money. And then their entire testimony is about the money. So when you hear somebody say it's not about the money, you can pretty much be sure it's exactly about the money. And so, the whole thing was, well, we're going to have these holes in our budget. We're not going to be able to run the DARE program anymore. We're not going to be able to do this. And we're not going to be able to do that.
The DARE program?
Yeah, apparently this police department's DARE program's funded at least partially by asset.
Oh, to me, that's a winning reason to kill it. The DARE program is just a series of federal spies. So, but we'll do an episode on that at some point. I went to Whole Foods Market, they're 365. They're kind of grab and go market, and there was somebody out there trying to raise funds for the DARE program. And I know a lot of people have the impression that DARE is there to get kids off of drugs. It's a positive school type thing, but really it's a snitch on your neighbor, snitch on your parents program that I would never support. But I think there are other programs that can help children in schools and things like that. But anyway, so the police are saying, oh, it's not about money, but then all their testimony says we have holes in our budget because of this.
Right. And I love that at the very end, and obviously I'm not going to have this quote off the top of my head, but I really encourage people to read this whole report. It's really interesting to see what these people were saying. But there was a guy that testified that was a defense attorney, and he was actually testifying in support of passing the bill. And he talked about the fact that he said police departments shouldn't have to eat where, how did he put it? It was a great quote. Now I can't remember it. But, basically what he was saying is that police departments shouldn't be put in the situation where they're depending on this program to fund their budget. And it's absurd for them to say that we're going to send you out there and, if you get this asset forfeiture money, it's going to be part of your budget. And then to say, well, we're not even thinking about that. Of course they're thinking about that. I mean, it's just a natural part of human nature. So it was really interesting listening to that. And there's a really interesting testimony, too, talking about the anecdotal stories about this poor guy. He was a veteran, suffered from PTSD, came back to the state. And like a lot of guys that are dealing with this, self-medicated with alcohol. He got busted for driving a couple of times, and they took his car away.
Oh,
and,
man.
In the process, he ended up going to get treatment, which was great. And, he's on the path to getting sober, getting things back in order. So he's like, hey, can I get my car back? And the sad part of this was he had bought the car in honor of one of his buddies that had been killed in Afghanistan and named it after him. So there was like this huge sentimental attachment to the car. He goes to the police, or his lawyer goes to the police and says, hey, we want to get this car back. We'll even pay you market value for it. The police department wouldn't do it. They would not give the man his car back, even though he had gotten in treatment, gone through the court system. They would not give him his car back. And what he said was interesting. He said, it was obvious to me that the police are running things behind the scenes. And to me, that's just telling. And we've seen it over and over again in every state whenever there's anything that to limit surveillance, to limit asset forfeiture, even to limit federal gun control, the police always oppose it.
Always. Number one opposition to our work to have states reject federal power. Number one opposition is not from communists. It's not from neocons. It's not from progressive Democrats. It's not even from Republicans. Nope. It's from law enforcement lobby, and it comes in the strangest situations with the strangest arguments. Like you said, supposedly law enforcement's supposed to be very pro-Second Amendment in many situations. But anytime we have a bill that would just say the state is not going to help the ATF enforce the federal ATF enforce federal gun control measures, you get a whole row of sheriff's department representatives, police union lobbyists, just line up person after person after person to say, this organization opposes. Here's why. This organization opposes. Because I think a lot of it gets down to this asset forfeiture thing. They're enforcing so many laws that shouldn't exist that they've had to expand their departments so much, and they need such huge budgets that any restriction on that means they have to fire people or lay people off, which then looks bad.
They'll even say it. We don't want to jeopardize our federal partners.
Yes. So
it's a bunch of bull crap. And when they tell you it's not about the money, it's absolutely all about the money. And the only time it's not about the money is when it's about the weapons they can get through the 1033 program and other Homeland Security.
Which is also about the money, because a lot of times the feds just give them, through the JAG program, they give them just straight up cash to buy stuff. So it is all about money all the time. And the problem is, well, there's a lot of them. But this report that you put together was fantastic. It's focused on Minnesota, but it doesn't matter where you are. Please read it, Mike. I know you're going to put the link to that in the show notes. But the report is very eye-opening on how these arguments play out. And this is very indicative of how we see it playing out just about everywhere. It doesn't matter what state it's happening in. Even here in California, where the state now is one of the best on restricting partnership with the Federal Equitable Sharing Program. That happened while Obama was in office. Senate Bill 443 from Holly Mitchell, I think it was, that was signed into law. It was the same opposition, same type of thing. We need these budgets. People people are going to be dying in the street if we can't take care of this. We keep getting our cash. It's insane, the arguments. But then the legislators generally fall for it. And that may be where in that story you're talking about, the guys like, oh, behind the scenes, the law enforcement lobbies are really running things. It's like the military-industrial complex. A lot of people talk about how the Pentagon or the arms dealers are pushing thing or lobbying for action here and there because they can sell more Tomahawks or they can sell more helicopters, whatever it may be. But on the state and local level, it's the same type of thing, but it's just with the law enforcement lobby partnering with the feds.
We need to come up with a clever name for that.
Not today. No. I don't have anything clever. I think this will probably wrap. This is going to be our asset forfeiture episode, plus complaints about a few other things. Right. I like it when we're grumpy. We're watching a few other bills on surveillance. I know we've touched on that. For example, House Bill 2104, the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, and also restricts stingray spying in Missouri. We're going to be sending out an action alert because a neocon kind of state senator has it in his committee after it passed the House 136-1, and we haven't even seen a hearing scheduled for it, and it's been about 3.5 weeks.
Yeah, almost a month.
So it's going to be time for people to start making phone calls. There's only a few weeks left in the legislative session there. In California, a bill that would empower local communities to break the tie between federal and local community surveillance. Senate Bill 1186 passed out of committee, correct? And it's into a second committee?
It did. It went to its second committee. And also in California, there are a number of cities that are in the process of passing ordinances to require oversight and transparency for their surveillance programs.
Basically, you can't just say what's happening right now is that local police are getting contacted, or maybe vice versa, with communication between them and Department of Homeland Security or Department of Justice, and they're saying, here's some equipment, spy on people, use it, or here's some money to buy this particular spy gear, use it, and then share the information with the feds through fusion centers or information sharing environment. And that's happening directly between the departments and the federal government. So basically the departments are acting as federal agents in that situation, and it's bad. And legislation to opt out of that is very positive, or put local control, at least have the local governing body or the people have a say in that. And Davis, California, Mike, you just reported on a bill like that, or an ordinance, I guess, on the local level passing.
Davis passed, and Berkeley, basically it's passed. It's just going through some last formalities.
Okay.
Where it's implemented. And then from what I've heard from activists there in Northern California, similar ordinances is probably going to pass in Oakland as well.
Excellent.
So, and the state bill that you mentioned before that would basically require this for all municipalities and counties in the entire state. So
that they actually make a decision on a local level. The state wouldn't force it.
Right, exactly.
Well, and California's got a lot of governing problems, just like every state. I know a lot of people from kind of the red states like to talk trash about California. Oh, the Constitution. A friend actually commented on my personal Facebook profile, say, oh, I miss California. I posted a picture. And they're like, I miss it. Too bad the Constitution isn't in effect in California. They don't use it. And honestly, they don't use it in any state.
No, they're not using it in Kentucky, I can tell you that.
They don't use it in any state. They only use it when it furthers their particular partisan goals, or like in Tennessee to grandstand when the opposing party is in power in Washington, D.C. So there are some positive things amongst the loads of negative that happen in California. So the restrictions on asset forfeiture is positive, and then these potential making it a local decision. The closer you are to the individual, I think the greater chance that individual liberty will flourish. So the further away from the individual, the less likely we have individual liberty. So when you bring these decisions close to home and when you decentralize, that's far better. So we'll be keeping an eye on those things. Do you know when the Berkeley vote is coming up finally, Mike?
No.
Okay. It's Berkeley.
It's this convoluted process.
Yeah, but it's Berkeley.
I understand it's passed twice.
Okay.
readings unanimously, and now it's got to go before some committee for the unions to give their thumbs up or something like that. I don't know. From what I understand, it's pretty much at this point just a formality.
And then also today, there's a hearing in Rhode Island from our good friend Blake Filippi. He's a state representative to restrict drone spying, and I think he's also a co-sponsor on another good bill there that's also up for hearing today to restrict spying by stingrays.
Stingray bill's real solid. I remember that one.
So both of those bills primarily focus on the state level, but they basically, by cutting off the surveillance on the state level, then the information isn't going to get shared to the feds. We'll be kind of following up on those in coming weeks as we have reports, if there are any. And then I guess that wraps it up. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to go to 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We need some cash to keep doing this work, and it's as little as $2 a month. So not tons. A lot of people pitch in. That pays the bills and actually helps us. We do some online advertising to reach new people and give them this message that we can advance liberty, whether Washington, D.C. wants us to or not. Thanks so much for watching 10th or Tuesday. We will see you here next time.